microphone.
She sounded like.
Thank you, guys.
Look who we have here.
All of you being here tonight. This is really quite an honor, and especially, you know, everybody traveled from South Dakota during the snow, and we're just so grateful to have our elders here with us tonight. So thank you very much. And for the press, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some brief bios so that way you know a little bit about everybody's background, and then we'll go ahead and launch into the Q&A, and then I'll open up for some questions. So starting out, Madonna Thunder Hawk. Oohenumpa Lakota is a veteran of every modern Native occupation from Alcatraz to Wounded Knee in 1973, and more recently the NODAPL protest at Standing Rock. She first became active in the late 1960s as a member and leader in the American Indian movement and co-founded Women of All Red Nations and the Black Hills Alliance, and served as a delegate to the United Nations in Geneva. Marcela Gilbert, to the left of her, is her daughter. She's a Lakota and Dakota community organizer with a focus on food sovereignty and cultural revitalization. She earned a master's degree in nutrition. Gilbert was a 2014 cohort of the Bush Foundation's Native Nations Rebuilders Program. She coordinates Simply Smiles Food Garden and healthy living initiatives on the reservation. That is awesome. And Elizabeth Castle is a scholar, activist, filmmaker who began interviewing women on the Red Power movement of almost 20 years ago. So she wrote the book, Women Were the Backbone, Men Were the Jawbone, Native Women's Activism in the Red Power Movement. And Castle is also descended from the Picoee Band of the Shawnee. Yeah! And Christina King, she's a producer and filmmaker whose work spans broadcast news, commercials, documentary film, and television, with a focus on human rights issues, civil engagement through storytelling. She's from Oklahoma and of the Seminole Creek, Sac and Fox Nations, as in currently living in unceded Lenape Nation in New York. Yeah! So I'm going to go ahead and start out by asking Elizabeth, tell us about your relationship to Madonna Thunder Hawk and the Lakota community and how warrior women evolved into the documentary that it is today.
You guys are the best crowd ever. Just want to say, the laugh meter, you have no idea, because I stalk crowds and I'm like, they didn't laugh, what's going on? That was supposed to be funny. You were like laughing before there was something funny. It was just, oh my gosh, it was good medicine. Thank you everyone for coming. I met Madonna in October 27th, 1998. And I was directed to her by Lakota Hardin, who you saw in the film, to start asking questions for my dissertation at a university. And, it started on this path that has brought a whole lot of amazing people in collaboration. I'm so thankful, everyone in the audience. who's joined us, who helped make the film. We're going to ask you to stand up at some point. But, you know, Madonna is just one of many voices that make up all of the activism and the families of the Red Power movement. But let's be honest, we get along the best, you know. It was just an instant. Just when we met all that time ago, for me, I was just like, I'll do anything to keep trying to tell this story. The story's bigger than me. The story belongs to everyone. What can I do? I mean, I didn't have those instantly lofty, you know, thoughts at the time. I have to have a good story now. But at the moment, I was just like, I got to hear the story. And the thing I learned right away was, and it was very hard for me, as you'll discover if you do talk to me, is trying to be quiet and listen. Just, you know, there's so much good things to say.
Well, didn't she call you a fake white woman, right?
That's officially, identity politics are challenging. We decided it might make sense to you, but, you know, because I live in the world as a white woman, I have Native heritage, but, you know, I don't want to be, I'm not a cultural pimp. And, you know, like there's a lot of things that go on, and I'm happy to explain it in a more calm manner, but just trying to recognize that I live a little bit in both spaces, and I'm accountable in more than one place.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so, Madonna, if you could tell us about your time in the movement, when you first joined the movement, if you could take us back to that time and your work as an activist within the movement, and how the moment led to the forming of the survival school.
Well, I don't know exactly about. It's hard to pinpoint things like that because, like the film showed, when I went to, it started when I went to school. When I was 6 years old, I went to boarding school, but I was bilingual. And they kept the ones in the first grade separate from everybody else because they didn't want the little girls talking to their siblings in Lakota. So they kept you separate. So all you're supposed to do is talk English. Well, many of them didn't know one word of English, but I did. So it started then, you know. Then I knew, you know, I had big wings because I could, you know, cover a lot. And that's what I did. So I think that's what it started for me. And then when the American Indian movement came along when it did, it was just kind of like automatic that my sister and I became a part of it. Because resistance comes. Now I can say that now, but at the time it was just like, you know, get out of the way, you know. And I didn't have to explain to anybody about why.
And Marcy, you had mentioned that when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned that when you decided to join survival school, that one of the first things that was your mom presented to you was the Fort Laramie Treaty. And she says, this is what you're going to learn. And so tell us about that experience, you know, going through that. It wasn't like you were always just playing. You had to learn about what was happening.
Yeah.
The
Actually, it was one of the other kids that were at the survival school. One of the older ones. The older ones were, I think the oldest was 21. And so one of those guys said, you need to learn this. This is what we're learning, and this is what everything is about. And so I learned that everything was all the trials that were going on, why Wounded Knee happened, you know, any political action that was going on was related to our treaties. So I had to know that one. And being 13 and reading the treaty, it was like, what does this mean? You know, because it's hard to read at that age. And I've read it several times since then. But yeah, that was my first experience walking in the door. They're like, you need to know this. And so it gave me a sense of pride as a 13-year-old to know something that I knew most of my peers didn't know, unless you were in a survival school. And so it was empowering from day one. It was like, yes, I'm gonna be part of something that's different. And when you're a teenager, you want to be part of something, you know? And so I got to be part of that, which was very cool. So I thought I was really cool.
Well, I felt, one thing, a takeaway, was that survival school led you to the UN in Geneva. When you think about that, and I saw the way that came full circle, and I thought, wow, that's really powerful. Who knew, being such a young age and going through that and learning how to really stand up and fight for your rights was going to lead through this journey, and you continue to stand up.
It was because of the adults that were guiding us. I mean, my mom was supposed to go, but she was like, I can't go, I'm too, and she said, you know what, we need to send some young people because they got to pick it up. It can't be us all the time. And so our survival school, or the AIM house in Rapid City, we were, because of my mom, we're the only ones who sent young people from all, because all over the world went. And that was the first time that indigenous people were in that arena, that many of us from all over the world. And 2 of us from our survival school got to go, young people. So it was because of, she was running the show.
Yes, of course. Now, Christina, being from the Seminole Nation, which is wonderful, and then working in Lakota country, with the Lakota people, as a director, how was it for you? Like, how did you immerse yourself in the culture? It's not always an easy thing to do. How did you start working with the community? And when do you feel that you found your voice, or you found, that kernel of a story that you're going to evolve it, and it's going to evolve in certain directions? Like, what was that like for you?
Well, the first step was just going out to South Dakota and just staying there. Beth and I had met through Vision Maker Media, who supported this film, and we met in Minneapolis, I think. Yeah. We met, and she, had been working on this project, because one of the things that I thought was really amazing about Beth is that both she and Madonna had been working on these oral histories and knew that if they didn't do something else with them, then only academics would ever see them. It would never feed back into community, and it did not, obviously Madonna didn't want that, and Madonna, I think you guys kept working together because Beth definitely didn't want that, where most people want to come in, write their paper, and then file it and get out, get the credentials, talk about that time on the res. And Beth definitely wasn't that person, so we really hit it off. And then when I came out to South Dakota, where Beth was, a Native Studies teacher, I just stayed, and much, I think, to Madonna and Marcy's discomfort, because we were, Madonna, there's a collection of dozens and dozens of these, and we just kept filming. I was really, really drawn to the fact that they were the only mother-daughter in the collection, and that you saw the only thing that keeps us here is our intergenerational strength. And I really wanted to focus on that. They, being the community-minded people they are, is don't focus on me. I don't want to be the one, which made me then really, really want to film that.
Where did you stay? Because you had mentioned, when we also talked the other day, you had mentioned getting a trailer and then just staying in a trailer on the res, or there was a moment. Can you tell that story?
Oh, it was fancy time. No, once we got the pop-up trailer, that was fancy.
Well, before that, I just want the audience to know, because when you're working with cultures, and when you're going out and you want to tell the story of a culture, it's very important to get to know the culture, and that is by really being with the people. And it's not just a fly-by-night, I'm going to be here a week or 2, being with the people, because it takes time to really understand. And especially a movie like this, a documentary like this, it's such a heavy subject, and there's only so much that you can actually say within it. So, and you know, I respect you so much for spending that time, you know, with our people, because it's very important to do that. And so I want you to just recall a story you told me on the phone.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. We talked for a long time. Well, but I think what you might be getting at is that, like, the reason why I knew there was just no question that I was going to go out and stay. I went with a one-way ticket. Like, that was thing one.
There you go.
That
one-way ticket.
I went with a one-way ticket because I had previously, it didn't make sense to me any other way. I had previously worked on a film in the Four Corners region that was on POV, and the whole time that I was shooting that film, which was about these 3 kids in their last year at Navajo Pine High School, I was living in a trailer in the parking lot for like the whole school year. I was like, I'm glad at the time I looked really young. Otherwise, it was like there's this old lady living in the parking lot, you know, trying to film us. But I think at that time we blended in a little bit. But I remember that at the same time that I was making that film and like staying there for the whole school year and hanging, you know, we were hanging out 24/7. There was a commercial production company who came in and started, you know, wanting to film with the same kid that I had been filming with for a very long time, and they're feeling like they totally treated me like dirt, and they were just like, oh, your hobby, you know, and they would come in this big Range Rover with like cameramen from like Los Angeles or New York, and they would come in and then they never saw the sunset. They were out back to the like hours to a hotel. And that's when I realized, like, oh, right, it's actually pretty easy to come into our communities and to get a little bit of like footage of people that, you know, it looks very exotic, and then sell it back on the coast as like this deep look, and people will totally buy it. So with this film, we did shoot a lot of verite, but thankfully, you know, Madonna and Marcy, like Madonna is still, you know, putting the young people out front, and Madonna and Marcy were very, very patient, as it took, you know, 6 years to like go swing from like a purely verite film to one that was also more of a story that like we wanted to tell. And so there was a long process of like decolonizing my voice and realizing that most of the films I grew up with that were indigenous documentaries are not really about us. They're like portraits of settler colonialism. And that's not a cultural documentary like about us. But that's mostly what's available. And so when I finally figured out what that sounded like, it sounded like us not on our back foot. It sounded like us when we, you know, are powerful and had something to say, and, you know, it wasn't just sort of, I do think that, and so it's kind of become a thing where I do feel like with indigenous, any indigenous community, we have to be so careful about verite film, because it's such a quick way to feel like you're really, really intimate with people really quickly, but it's also a very quick way to, it's sort of, you can misunderstand most of what you're seeing, and especially for like, you know, our communities, you often will watch something, and I felt like the audience was often, you know, substituting like their version of like some neo-hippie ideas, or, you know, a little bit of like, you know, eco-pride, and then thinking that that was like an indigenous worldview. And so we just started pulling that stuff out, and we found it like, yeah, well, of course they're not understanding what we're talking about because we're using the Queen's English to say it. So let's just show more things and kind of say a little less.
Yeah, that's great.
It took 6 years, so I tried to condense it.
Yeah, I know, it's a long time. Now, but Madonna, can you talk about relocation? The Indian the relocation program, and when that hit, and how it really affected the people during that time.
Well, I think the relocation program, for starters, was a federal policy. Oh. I can't hear it. Okay, is this on? Is it on?
Yeah.
Ta-da! Oh, okay. Yeah, it was a federal, federal government policy. Basically relocate the Indians. And I was young then, and many of our people, it was just like, wow, you can sign up, and they'll send you anywhere in the United States to a big city, and there's just all these, they just painted this beautiful picture, of course. So yeah, I went. I thought it was a great idea, But make a long story short, what happened to some of us, not everybody, a lot of people just went home, saw what was happening, and hung out for a while, and then just headed home. But there was there was some of us that paid attention, and we were watching what was happening with the anti-war movement and the farm workers and Black Power and those kinds of amazing things that were going on in this country. And so the relocation program, I think, kind of backfired because it had the opposite effect. Well, the federal Indian policies, they never know what they're doing because they don't know us. They don't know, I mean, it was like today we have social media, and all of that. Well, that was our social media back in those days. We got to go to all the big cities all over the country, and then everybody went home and said, look what's going on out there, basically. But for us from the Dakotas, because we have the strong treaties that were ratified by Congress, we knew that much, that they were valid and that the government could never make them unvalid, So we went from there. So that's what the relocation program did for me and my, extended family and friends that felt the same way I did.
One of the things in the film that really struck me was when the commodity foods were coming in. Does anybody here know what commodity foods are? Raise your hand if you do. I'm just curious. Oh, okay, that's good. There's lots of natives in here. So one thing is when those foods came in, because in the film you talk about living within the laws and principles of nature and being in rhythm, and that being that living off the land and drinking water from the streams, and it was a bountiful time, where you were with the land. And after relocation and when the commods were coming in and everything started to change, how was it like on the reservation during that time and having to force assimilate into that? And I know this is actually a question kind of for Marcella and also Madonna, because Marcella is also working in the food movement program, and I want to know if that influenced you to go into nutrition, once you learned about the commods and stuff. Can you talk about that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, well, commodities were part of our treaty obligations. That's one of the things in our treaties, is if they're going to kill all our food and take it away, they need to replace it in trade for land. But so that's why we have commods. But what I was learning through, as I was spending time on and off the reservation, when I would go home, there would be more and more sick people, more and more heavy people. And so I was like, well, what's going on here? And so in my late 20s, I was like, why? I knew there was diabetics, and they were usually the elderly. But pretty soon they started being in their 40s. And I was like, what? I thought this was an old person's disease, because I didn't know much about it. So then I started researching it and finding out that it was definitely related to food and lifestyle. And then knowing our history, that we've had forced diet changes since day one, but also our lifestyle changes. For those of us who, had a relationship with a horse, there was federal policy to kill horses in Indian country. So thousands and thousands of horses were killed. And that happened among our people where we're from. And so that was a forced lifestyle change. Our men, that took a big chunk out of their lives because they couldn't have horses. So just doing the research and realizing that when's the last time we had our own diet for our people? I mean, I look around the country now, and you could, here in New York City, you could go anywhere and get Greek. There's a whole community of Greek people. There's a whole community, you know, all these different people and their foods. But you can't, where's ours? Where's our food? And I'm not talking about fried bread. You know, that's a survival food. That came from the concentration camp, extermination era, when those foreign foods were forced on us. So learning all that and realizing, you know, that was my passion, but also being healthy was something that led me into looking at our foods, because, you know, being active, you gotta eat well too. So that led me to getting a degree in nutrition and really looking at, you know, our own diets. And it was interesting because when I went to college, I got talked into it to get my master's degree in 2001. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to know the nutritional value of our foods. And they said, well, you would be the expert because we don't know. You know, they didn't have anything set up. Nothing in 2001. You know, so I had to do something else. But since then, there's, you know, you can go and get some more information about our traditional foods, you know, the nutritional value and stuff like that. So I think my push that I educate young people as much as I can, anybody who listen to me, and then also talking about, okay, if we're gonna go back to our eating our traditional foods, then that means land preservation, which means water. I mean, it's all, you know, it's a lot. It isn't just changing your diet and eating the best food. Our people do well on fresh foods and wild game. And one of the things I'm learning traveling with this film, we went up to the Yukon, and the people up there, they still treat their food sacred. They talk about it like it's you know, they're like, you know, if you're not feeling well, you better eat some moose. You know, and I was thinking, we don't talk like that anymore. You know, I know Indian people who don't like buffalo. My own kids don't like deer meat, and I'm like, what? Where did I screw up there? You know, I love it. You know? But it's like you have to have access. You know, and because of all the crap that we're doing to our lands, the animals are getting poisoned. And so there's times when we can't hunt because they're sick. So instead of hunting them, we pray for them. Those of us who still eat them. But our people are very, very far removed from our relationship with food. It used to be, we used to think of it as medicine, and we used to think of it as a relative, and now we don't. And that's killing us. So to me, I think it's a really, really, it's an issue that it needs to be a priority if we want to get our health back and get off this diabetes train. We got to do that.
Yes, yes. Madonna, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
There's an ally here. Tom, stand up. Tom Burgess. Okay, this guy came out to South Dakota back when, if you on the film you saw the International Bible Gathering. Him and I were coordinators on that. And he came out, and he was the first one I heard talking about back in the day about food co-ops and about organic food and things like that from him. And then after the gathering, he came home to our reservation and spent some time. So allies are so important. That's why all of you sitting in here are so important. I just keep trying to see your faces, you know, because you don't realize how powerful your energy is for us, you know. Yeah, we're in the crosshairs every day, you know, but we have allies, hopefully. And real quick, before we forget, Beth, are we going to talk about people that helped with this? Because Hoover's here. If he's still here. Richard, where is he? Well, anyway, maybe I'm kind of jumping the gun. Oh, there you are. Stand up. This is Richard Hoover. Beth, tell about
Richard Hoover. So the beautiful black and white archival footage, mostly of the survival school kids, and Madonna, like they were sitting in the field. All the discussions about treaty, at the Treaty Council meeting, was all done by Richard Hoover and Paul Chatt-Smith, who made the film "We Are the Evidence of the Western Hemisphere," and this came from the outtakes, and that he gave us access to, and allowed us to use it. And anybody who's a filmmaker, what that means in developing those relationships. But that just changed everything. Being able to just have those visions and be able to see these empowered kids at that time.
Yeah, it's so huge, and that footage is a gift. It's a gift to us. It's a gift to future generations to see everybody in that way, because the mainstream media was not filming, them this way, and they still often don't really film us that way. And it was incredible, and even more incredible that he was so open and sharing with it. But that was something that was such a difficult thing that Beth really spent the most time digging through. And that we did spend some time here at I think CBS, just we would ask them for anything with Indians or Native American, anything. And then we would just watch through it, and the whole time Beth being this is a historian would be that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. But the search word would just be miscellaneous Indians, but these are all really important people. And we spent hours one day just watching through everything, and then we saw, I can't even remember which piece it was, but we saw Madonna's face, and it's just, when you screen in there, you have headphones on, it's quiet, they're just researchers, and we were yes! Everyone's what are they doing? But
Madonna smoking a cigarette.
Yes!
Major.
Another method we had was to look for major names, look for Russell, look for that name, and then look to the right or the left of him, because that's who they were filming, but they weren't filming the women. So every little shred of that, there was a point where I said, if this film is just terrible, at least we add it to the historical record, and I'm good with that. That's so, you did a great job. Really great job. For the sake of time, everybody, I think what I'm going to do is open it up to questions from the audience. And
You have mics.
Yes. So, okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start there.
I want to ask Madonna.
Just wait for the mic, everyone.
Yes. Hold on.
Oh,
for
you
the
can
mic.
hear me. You can hear me. I want to ask about
Please hold on one second.
Okay.
We're
Really
taping.
appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to ask about the survival school. You said the three subjects one was spiritualism and the three things, but your daughter went to college and got a master's degree, so you were obviously also covering other subjects as well. I mean, she's well educated. So can you tell us a little bit beyond those three things, what you taught and how you did it?
Well, first of all, I wasn't an educator. I just wanted a safe place for these kids to be, but also because most of them were children of families of the American Indian movement and those that were on trial, families that were on trial. So we knew there was going to be bullying at the schools and fighting and all that kind of stuff. But basically, it was my son said we should have our own school. So I said, yeah, we should have our own school. I'm not an educator. I didn't know. I just thought of, children first, safety, the rest will come. And I had a lot of volunteers that came, showed up to help, and it was really good. But not one person of any kind of authority ever came knocking on our door and saying, who gave you the authority to have all these kids here? Have you had a background check? No, nobody, ever. Not even parents. They just came to help out once in a while, and would help donate food or something like that. So it was a different time. Yeah, it was definitely a different time. But the survival school eventually, the short time we had with them was mainly just talking with other adults and talking with the older ones. It was, we got to get them prepared for our life, not life somewhere else. This thing bothers me. Anyway, can you hear me?
Madonna, we don't need the mic.
We're taping.
So basically what we knew was, because we never really, when you don't have a predictable society or, things are gonna happen, a progression. I didn't know she was gonna ever even step foot in a college, but that wasn't my decision. You get these kids ready to do whatever they're gonna do. And so she's basically self-taught to go through, get a bachelor's, then go on to a master's. She did it herself. She didn't get it from, when we had the younger ones, for example, we just bought the games, those of you that are old enough to know these old games we had, like Spill and Spell. That's how we taught, because I wasn't an educator. But we also taught them that, okay, you hear so much about a lot of families on food stamps, what is that? Well, let's go find out. So we went down to the food stamp office and learned all about it, what it meant and what it was. And that's why the treaty was so important, because okay, these are the provisions in this treaty that the United States government, our ancestors ceded millions and millions of acres of land so we could have in this treaty, ratified by Congress, food, education, housing. So they learned that kind of stuff so that they were prepared to go on and do whatever they wanted to do.
In the film, there's a lot of talk, we talk about being empowered. That was part of that. I was not afraid to go to college. I was not afraid to go anywhere because I was empowered as a young person and knew where my place was, which was anywhere in this country because I'm from here.
Okay. Let's just lady here with the purple scarf.
Akwe, Tabutni for coming. I just want to say that speaking with you, meeting you, seeing this film, that is education. That is the best education I have ever had. Speaking with my elders, traveling the country, meeting our indigenous people, hearing their stories. So thank you, Tabutni. My question, I call myself an activist. I do a lot of activist work and advocacy work. And I think, I see a lot of indigenous youth, and I've met tons of indigenous youth who are have a voice and have a mission, and it's great. But what I also notice is that we feel burned out, and when we walk into spaces, we are the only indigenous person, and we are speaking for all indigenous people. But I can only speak from my experience as a Shinnecock woman. So my question to you, since you have been doing this activism work for so long, what would you tell the youth, the indigenous youth today? How would you tell them to keep going? And when they feel burnt out and they feel like they can't keep going, how would you tell them to continue going? Because I know for me, right now I feel burnt out. But I feel so empowered meeting you and seeing this film and seeing everything that you've been doing. So that would be my question to Whitney.
Wonderful question.
Well, I think it's good that when you're at that point, where you feel burnt out and stuff like that. But you remember all the ancestors that have your back.
Yes.
That's all you need. And those of us elders that are still walking around, we have your back. What else do you need? Take that time, take that burnt out and shrug it off, because back in our day we said the cause. You're here and I'm here because of what our ancestors did. Okay? So take that time, get some downtime and breathe there, because we need you. You can't be doing that. You can't be burning out.
to come in.
Hi. When I talk to Trump supporters and they think of themselves as real American, I always think these are the people that would have been Nazi soldiers, they would have been out slaughtering Native Americans, they would have been fighting to maintain their slaves. Do you think now is the time, I mean, a time where this film would be more important and more, you know, just needs to be seen more than it would have, let's say, 10 years ago, because we are pretty much going backwards to this place where we were 150 years ago. That's my statement, my question. Okay.
I mean, now is the time. I mean, it's always the moment, but, you know, we have, it is the time for warrior women more than any other moment. We have, you know, Trump aside, I mean, whatever, I mean, he doesn't change dramatically in any specific way the type of oppression and struggles that are happening in Indian country every day. But what we are seeing is, you know, we have national leadership that we've never seen before. We have awareness of murdered, you know, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. If you don't know what that means, go look it up and check it out and figure out how you can support legislation that helps to collect the data and helps to make it so that, like the scene that you see in the film where we're talking about the fact that you can't prosecute a non-Native person for assault on a reservation unless the Violence Against Women Act is reauthorized and goes through. These are all super critical things. So I just always believe, you know, if you really want to save it all, you have to follow the leadership of Indigenous women.
We have time for 2 more questions. 2 more questions. Over there. Yes, sir.
Just quickly, can you explain the horse killings? What were they trying to do with that? You mentioned the policy.
They were, how can I don't, well, our people were horse people, and our lives were around the horse. Before the invasion of our lands, you know, they were part of us. They were relatives, and they took care of us, and so we were considered horse nation. There was a bunch of horse nations all over, but the policy, if you look at government policy, it affected our food. You know, they know that if they figured that if we don't have our food, then we can't. They used, like, there's it was the starvation policy. If they didn't give us food unless we gave up land. Then there's the policy about horses, because they knew that gave us power. Anything that empowered us, they took away through policy. And plus there was other stuff going on. I mean, what they were doing, they were fighting each other, you know, all these wars that they were having in the East. And they needed horses, they needed glue, they needed, you know, whatever else they could get from horses. But the main thing was, the policy was to exterminate, but also traumatize. So they did that by taking our children, anything that we loved. And they knew that we were related to those horses. And so they took that and slaughtered them in front of us. They didn't take them and then, you know, we're gonna take them over here and get all this glue for whatever they needed it for, whatever. Because, you know, they used horsehair in their building of their homes, and, you know, there was a bunch of stuff. But the inhumanity against humans to traumatize us so that to the point where we could not function. So when you look at our communities now, people are like, well, why don't you just do this? Well, why don't you guys just work? Why don't you just, you know? It's not easy when you have a history of trauma. That's 5 generations. For me, it's 5 generations of traumatic experience that we talk about parenting in the film. There are so many other things that we have to try to relearn and figure out how to do all over again because of the boarding school experience alone. Not all the extermination period and the killings of our food sources, you know, all the other stuff, but the boarding school experience alone has traumatized our people to a point where we can't even function normally. There's a lot of dysfunction in our communities because we learned that in boarding school. All the abuses that you hear of in our communities comes from boarding school. We learned all that from them. And so we're up against a lot trying to survive. We're still in survival mode because we're just trying to get, you know, function in a way that we can do what we need to do to bring our people back in a way that is the way that the Creator wanted us to be here. And that's another thing. You know, who has the right to remove you as a person that, you know, take everything that the Creator gave you? Who has that right to take that away? And so that's the kind of stuff that we have to work. So when people come to our community, they're like, oh my God, they're just like this and they're like that. Oh, what's wrong with them? How come they don't just do this? You know, come and hang out. Come and learn the real history of this country and then figure it out.
I think that we're in a really important time in our nation's history, and it's really time to look at our national narrative and really look at the historical truths that have happened. You know, it's not something that has been talked about over the last, 20 years, but now is the time because you're looking at history repeating itself all over again. But for Indigenous people, we are here. And we're strong. There are over 560 tribes just within North America. Each one of us, all distinct from each other. We have cultural values, traditions, so much to share, with the world. And I feel like stories like Warrior Women are very important because although it's an extremely broad subject, they're moments within time that we can talk about, that really look at historical truths that are meant to elevate all of our consciousness here today. Because once we face those truths, I think that's the way that we can all heal, our nation can heal. So I want to thank you all for being here with us tonight.
T-shirts.
We have t-shirts, Warrior Women t-shirts that are being sold out in the front. And I also want to make an announcement. There's going to be, can you pass that down quickly? I've been asked from one of our Indigenous brothers who's here from South Dakota, who is going, Darren Thompson from Flambeau, he's Ojibwe. He's going to be performing Thursday, Friday, Saturday at the Smithsonian National Museum of American Indian. It's free and open to the public, so please go. All right, thank you.